Get ready for a Sonic adventure.
Oh Sonic, what a career you've had. From platforming in 2 dimensions, to platforming in 3 dimensions, to being a race car driver, then a werehog, then a laughingstock, then a laughingstock again, then pretending to be a monkey, and then along the way working in the education sector. Yep, you heard that right. Anyway, the Sonic franchise has a lot of games, and quite a few of those games have just disappeared off the face of the earth and faded into obscurity. And that's what we're looking at today. What are some of the most obscure and forgotten Sonic games, and what happened to them? So, to kick off this video, we have Knuckles Chaotix, developed and published by Sega, and was released in 1995 for the 32X, which was an expansion for the Sega Genesis. Now, before we dive any further into the actual game, we just need to take a quick lore break and talk about the 32X. It was released as an expansion to the Genesis in late 1994 and took the console into the 32-bit era. Obviously, the Sega Saturn would just go on to do that anyway, but that's besides the point. This expansion cost about £170 here in the UK, bearing in mind the console itself cost just below £200 as well. Overall, that's quite expensive, especially when you adjust that for inflation. Whilst the Sega Genesis itself sold over 30 million units, the 32X didn't even break 1 mil. In fact, it only sold 800,000 units. So realistically, any game made for this thing was pretty much doomed from the start, and sadly that was the case for Knuckles Chaotix. Now, I've gone through a lot of sites trying to find the exact figure of games sold for Knuckles Chaotix, and the conclusion is this game sold less than 30,000 copies, which is really not good at all. For comparison, the original Sonic the Hedgehog, just for the Sega Genesis, or the Mega Drive depending on where you were in the world, sold over 20 million copies. Okay, so this game does not feature Sonic at all, but it is obviously a Sonic game. It stars Knuckles, Mighty the Armadillo, Espio the Chameleon, Vector the Crocodile,
Vector! Oh yeah!
and Charmy Bee. Now, Mighty the Armadillo first appeared in Sega Sonic the Hedgehog in arcades, and then appeared in this game, and then literally just disappeared until Sonic Mania a few years back. All the other characters in this game then went on to star in Sonic Heroes a few years later, which is like one of my favourite Sonic games ever. Anyway, gameplay consists of you and one other character essentially being tethered together with what is basically an elastic band, which is the game's gimmick. You can pull back on that band to launch yourself up, down, left or right. You can use it to platform. It was a cool idea. However, in practice, it's probably not my favourite thing I've ever used. In this game, the group, called Chaotix, are trying to stop Dr. Eggman and Metal Sonic from harnessing the power of the island's mythical Chaos Rings. Anyway, this game received very mixed reviews. Some people liked the graphics, some people didn't like the graphics, some people liked the rubber band mechanic, some people did not like it. It was a very mixed bag overall. And the same went for the level design and difficulty, with some saying it was the right level of difficulty, some saying it was way too easy, some liking the levels and some not. IGN went on to say that it is a bad game with a good foundation, which might possibly be the only true or remotely close to being true thing they've ever said. In terms of my thoughts on this game, I spent a couple of hours with it, and I didn't hate it at all. I thought it was pretty cool, the idea was cool. I actually kind of like the character selection, how it's like a grabber machine. That was quite a cool idea, but I do get where the reviewers and the public are coming from in terms of the mixed opinions. Okay, so next up we have the game you were probably all expecting me to talk about, which is Sonic Schoolhouse.
I'm Sonic. Click on me for help.
Yeah, you know what, I think I do need help after this one. The fact that these are all real rendered animals and this isn't just a joke. My god, man. Anyway, everyone, welcome to Sonic Schoolhouse, an educational video game developed by BAP Interactive and Orion Interactive, and published by Sega Entertainment. This was released in October 1996, and unironically is one of the earliest 3D Sonic games. This was a PC-only release, and the game required a whopping 8 megabytes of RAM to be able to run. Anyway, if you couldn't tell, this is a game aimed at quite young children teaching maths, reading, and spelling. This is a first-person game where you explore the schoolhouse and go to different classrooms, answer questions on the blackboards, and there are a couple of mini-games as well. The CEO of Sega Entertainment actually described this as like Doom, but for kids. Which, with the first-person perspective, I mean, I guess that kind of makes sense given the time period this came out in. As you've been watching the gameplay for Sonic Schoolhouse, have you thought, this weirdly reminds me of something? Well, you'd be right.
Oh, shitty dicks. Shitty titty dicks. Shitty titty dicks. Shitty titty dicks. No! Oh!
Yup, this game inspired Baldi's Basics. Good god. Anyway, this game sold significantly more than Knuckles Chaotix did. Although not really relevant, I know, but it sold approximately 1 million copies. It's very hard to gauge reviews on these kind of games, because this is the kind of game that you'd be forced to sit and play during a computer session at school, so it's not exactly something that a firm like IGN would go for. It does the job, it teaches kids very basic things, and it has Sonic. So I guess it achieved what it set out to do, so congratulations Sonic Schoolhouse. I hope we never cross paths again. Anyways, on to the next game. How does this look more cooked than Sonic Schoolhouse? Let me introduce to you Sonic Jam. And no, this is not the Sega Saturn game that was a very cool and good compilation of Sonic games. No, this is Sonic Jam for the Gamecom. Now what the fuck is a Gamecom, I hear you ask? Well, up until this point, I had no idea either. The Gamecom, or TheGame.com, is a handheld console released by Tiger Electronics in 1997. It was supposed to be a competitor to the Game Boy. This cost about £60 at launch, and sold less than 300,000 copies, before being discontinued in 2000. Coincidentally, the year I was born in. Am I the second coming of the Gamecom? Who knows? Before we jump back onto the monstrosity that's on screen, there were a couple of cool things about this console. It had a weirdly impressive lineup of licensed titles ranging from Batman and Robin, Duke Nukem, Mortal Kombat, Jurassic Park, Frogger to Sonic the Hedgehog. And on top of this, if you purchased an internet cartridge and dial-up modem separately, you could plug them into the console and you could access your emails, send emails, and you could do text-based browsing. Seems silly now, but this was the late 90s, it's kinda cool. Anyway, back to the game. So this sack of shit was developed by Tiger Electronics, and is the only Sonic game represented without colour, simply due to the shitty handheld screen. Anyway, not only does the actual gameplay look awful, but this game compilation actually failed at being a compilation, because it doesn't actually feature the full games. It just features one zone from Sonic the Hedgehog 2, one zone from Sonic 3, and one zone from Sonic and Knuckles. Gameplay-wise, it's pretty much the Sonic you know and love, except it's basically unplayable, and also Knuckles loses his glide and climbing abilities for no reason at all. This game was not optimized at all, it has really bad collision detection, and for a game where Sonic is supposed to be fast, the characters move very slow. By the way, I know I mentioned it had zones from those games. They're not even direct ports of the levels. They just have similar aesthetics, if you can even call it that. The levels themselves are completely new designs. One cool thing about this game though is it was one of the only times that Sonic was on a non-Sega console before Sega went third party in the GameCube era. Although honestly, I kinda wish this just never happened. I'm glad this is a forgotten game, and frankly it should stay forgotten because it's fucking awful. Anyways, on to our next game. Okay, so next up we are jumping forward in time quite a bit to 2015. This is Sonic Runners, although what is actually on screen is Sonic Runners Revival. Still the same game as the original, but it's been brought back with a custom server, as part of the Revival project. Anyway, more on that later. So this is an endless runner game for Android and iOS. It was developed by the Sonic team and was the first Sonic game exclusive to smartphones. and was of course published by Sega. So as you guessed, you are constantly running forward, and the only thing you can really control on Sonic is his jump. Now there are other playable characters, but for the sake of argument, I'm talking about Sonic here. Now I did quite enjoy my time playing the Revival version, although at the end of the day, it is an endless runner game, so it's only as good as it can be. However, I did not experience the issues that a lot of critics had with the game. The biggest complaints were the pop-up ads and the pay-to-play elements and technical issues, and I didn't really run into these playing this revived version, as I assume most of this has been ironed out, and I was not shoved with pop-up ads. Although, with it being a fan game, they're not actually allowed to profit off it anyway, so that makes sense. Anyway, my point is this game had a lot of pop-up ads and pay-to-play elements, which, it's a mobile game, what did they expect? This happens every time. But because of this, unfortunately the game failed commercially and did not make very much money. Sega discontinued this game in July 2016, barely lasting a whole year. Gameloft did later release a replacement game, or sequel if you will, called Sonic Runner's Adventure, which came out in 2017, but that one you just had to buy outright, it wasn't like a free-to-play game, so I guess that's better, but that's to talk about another time. Eventually, in 2019, or as far as I can tell based off their website, Sonic Runner's Revival was born, and has been continuously updated and patched since then. Which is just really cool to see. I always love when games come back this way, like Club Penguin, Toontown Rewritten. I think that Spider-Man Endless Runner has just made a comeback as well. It's very cool, and I love being able to play these games again. Anyway, on to our next game. Okay, so now we're going back in time to 1995 for a game on Sega's own handheld console, the Game Gear. This is Tails Adventure. This game was developed by Aspect and published by Sega, and released in late 1995. This was basically the Sonic series take on the Metroidvania kind of gameplay. It was definitely going for something different, which is very cool to see. So this game is a lot more slower paced than your traditional Sonic outing. Tails just kind of walks and flies, and it's all item based, and you collect different things to use throughout the levels, which you have to backtrack on. At the time, reviews weren't particularly kind to it. They didn't hate the game, but just kind of said it was meh, which, I can get when you got all your faster paced Sonic games and the classics just coming out around that time. But in hindsight, retrospective reviews started to come through, especially as the game was re-released on 3DS back in 2013. Those reviews are pretty much what I just said about the Metroidvania kind of thing and how it was cool to see the Sonic franchise go in new directions. One thing I will say is that the backgrounds in this game aren't particularly nice. A lot of the environments are quite dark, and a lot of it just kind of looks the same. So I get the cool vibe, but it just was a bit samey. Anyway, unlike some of the other games in this list, this game has popped up quite a few times in collections since its release. It first reappeared as an unlockable bonus game in Sonic Adventure DX for the GameCube, later again in the Sonic Gems collection, and then again in Sonic Origins Plus just last year, and that is on top of its re-release on the 3DS eShop. Well, on to the next game. Oh god, this one hurts to talk about. This is Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood. Now, this game is probably forgotten because most of us have chosen to forget about it, and honestly, that's completely fair enough. This is an RPG outing for Sonic, which is the only one in the franchise, and I'm surprised it took them this long to do it because Mario has been in so many RPGs. Anyway, everything looked good up to the game's release. You had BioWare making the game, who have made Knights of the Old Republic, Mass Effect, you've heard the story by now. But what we got was just a complete mess. It felt like they released a prototype into the public and just called it a day. The entire game is controlled via touch, which is just not great at all. Sonic feels very unresponsive when you're moving him around. There's a bunch of moves that you have to set up like 3 or 4 times in a row with touchscreen controls that you have to follow. It's just, like, the idea was there, I guess, but it just is not great in execution. And on top of that, it's just hella ugly, I'm not gonna lie. Like, it's just 2D backdrops with some really ugly 3D sprites. Just don't look at them for too long because it really hurts your eyes. I don't know, I owned this game when I was a kid, and I remember thinking this was really great when I was like 8 years old when it came out, because I was like, oh, turn-based RPG combat, haha, Pokemon. I was a bit naive. But going back to this for this video, my god, what a jarring wake-up call this was. It's fucking awful. This was intended to be the start of a series, but as you can probably tell, they never made another one after this. Now, surprisingly, the Metascore for this game is actually 74 out of 100 overall for critical reviews, which is a lot higher than I was expecting, and the user score is 6.4, but if you pretty much ask any Sonic fan, they don't like this one. With good reason. Anyway, on to our final section. Okay, so finally, it's more of an honourable mention than it is a complete look, because this would be a whole other video in itself. I'm talking about Sonic Cafe. And you're probably thinking, what the fuck is that? Well, Sonic Cafe was a Japan-only mobile game service. It cost 315 yen per month, which is about £1.58 here in the UK, and this service was active from 2001 all the way through to 2007, and had many games released throughout that time. Now, these were mini-games mostly, don't get me wrong, but it's still very cool to see so many Sonic games. There were games ranging from Sonic Tennis, Sonic Fishing, Sonic Darts, to actual ports of Sonic games to an extent. There was even one called Sonic Kart and a game featuring Shadow. All in all, there were over 30 games released for this service all around the Sonic franchise. So you see why I can't just include every single one in this video, because we'd be here for a very long time. That's definitely a story for another day. Okay, so that takes us to the end of our look at some obscure and forgotten Sonic the Hedgehog games. There are so many more that I haven't even covered in this video, so please let me know if you'd like to see a part 2 on this one, or even just a video on Sonic Cafe itself, because that could be a whole other thing. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and tap the bell for notifications for all future uploads. It's very much so appreciated. As always, I will see you in next week's video. Bye-bye.
You want me to go fast? That's Sonic's thing. Ugly Sonic goes slow, baby.